So I'm going to be covering in this section Christianity and Islam, and it's really difficult to cover everything that I want to cover in a limited amount of time. And so, unfortunately, I will be skipping over certain things that are not an indication of their importance. It's just certain things are going to have to get overlooked. I may accidentally also overlook some important things. So, because these are topics that I think students especially take interest in, um, I look forward to questions being added, maybe even some debate about the information that I'm getting. Um, so just please be engaged with the material and feel free to inquire with me over things that you didn't understand, that you would have liked clarification on, or things that you may even think that I got a little wrong. I'm okay with that. So, um, moving forward here, I'm combining the history of Rome and the beginning of Christianity, and I'm going to go into Christianity through that route. In the New Testament, there is a book of Romans 1:14-15 that says, I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks. The Greek word here used is barbarians, by the way. Both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I am so eager to preach to the gospel also to you who are in Rome. So we do have a tradition within a biblical text of Rome being a center of worship. So what we see in Christianity is essentially it being located in the Middle East and the broader Mediterranean world. Okay, we'll cover more about that. So first of all, I'm not going to take for granted that everybody understands who Jesus is or so forth. So I just want to discuss certain basic things. According to secular historians and other historians alike, Jesus was born in 4 BCE in Bethlehem. If you remember, how is it that Jesus could be born 4 years before I mean, before Common Era is what we use now, but it used to be BC, before Christ. So how can Christ be born 4 years before Christ? If you remember, I looked at my syllabus, I discussed that there was an error in the calculation that was discovered later. So the calendar was originally that we have set up by Christians that it was intended to use Jesus as the marker for history. So everything that happened before him was timed one thing, and then everything after based on him. But it's supposed to be based on his birth, and it was 4 years off. That's just the way it is, and that's not debated by anybody that I've ever seen. So we see him born 4 years before he was born. Now, there's historically limited. The history that we have of him is limited to the writing of his followers. Okay, that's just something to point out. Because there's not really almost anything written about him outside of that context. Some people make the argument that he doesn't exist historically. Okay, I think that that's fair in the sense that Zoroaster gets critiqued, and historians, they find that Lao Tzu seems to maybe not exist, but they don't doubt if Confucius existed. It doesn't seem like such a sinister thing, except that when you get to something that's important to people, like fundamentally salvation and the core of their religion, Jesus has to exist. For historians, they're looking at it, well, what's the history show? I just want to make that clear that there is that debate out there. But I'm taking the position that he existed. Okay, so that's and many even non-believers believe that he existed. So I'm just moving forward with that. But I like to expose you to some of the various debates that happen within history and why that they're happening. Okay, and don't assume that all the critics of whether he was existed or not are just kind of evil atheists trying to attack Jesus specifically. Some have that drive. There's no doubt. But again, many people doubt that Lao Tzu existed, while for Taoists, traditional Taoists, he did. There's just people who follow a more strict line of what they think qualifies as evidence, and other people who go, a different path on that. Okay, so I'm just exposing you to the debate. So his hometown is recorded to be in Nazareth. And Nazareth was a zealot stronghold of Galilee. If you remember, the zealots were kind of anti-Roman factions that eventually are going to be participating in rebelling against Rome, and the destruction of the temple is going to occur, and so forth. People debate if he was a follower of John the Baptist, or John the Baptist followed him, like in the New Testament. Part of the reason, and I wish I had more time to go over this, there's a group, they did exist in Iraq. I think because of the war in Iraq, they're almost all expelled now. Since the U.S. invasion of Iraq, it became almost unbearable for the Mandeans. There's a group called Mandeans, and they baptize, and they claim to be descendants of, their religion is following John the Baptist, and they claim that he was the real one, and essentially not Jesus. It's very interesting. You should look them up if you get a chance. But what that implies is that there was a John the Baptist and a Jesus, and that early on there were people debating about who really should get credit for this movement. That's all I'm also pointing out there. It implies that. We don't know. It's interesting, right? To question or wonder what actually took place. And if there was at one time a split between people who were loyalists to John the Baptist and Jesus, it seems to be the case if there's still a small minority that exists following John the Baptist. Now, there's also the question of him, a student under the Mishnaic sage Rabbi Hillel, or his school. So why there is a question. It states here, as Hillel the elder had stated, whosoever destroys a soul is considered as if he destroyed the entire world, and whoever saves a life, it is considered as if he saved an entire life. Now, why am I mentioning that? Let me back up, be more clear. There's always a question when you see a quote and you see another quote somewhere else. Does that mean that they coincidentally quoted each other, or there was an influence on the other? Okay, so in other words, can we say that Jesus, what a secular historian looks into, is what Jesus is recorded to have said, is it unique to itself? And these are kind of things that get kind of tricky. I just quoted a passage from the Talmud here under Hillel. Now, you notice it says, whoever destroys a soul is considered as if he destroyed an entire world. The Quran, the Muslim holy book, in 532 says, because of that we decreed upon the children of Israel, and whoever kills a soul, unless for a soul or corruption in the land, it is as if he had slain mankind entirely. Boom. Now we're seeing a quote from the Talmud in the Quran. Okay, and it's also in reference to Hillel. Hillel then also said in the Talmud, what is hateful to thee, do not unto thy fellow man. This is the whole law, and the rest is commentary. What did Jesus say according to Matthew 22, 39 and 40? Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. It's in essence the same thing. And so for Muslims and for Christians, the idea would be the Holy Spirit is what moves, God moved certain quotes to be in there. We do see Hillel's quotes pop up in the New Testament and even in the Quran. Putting aside the topic of the Quran right now, some people wonder if Jesus was a student of Hillel because of that. And I, again, have no conclusion on this. It's just an interesting point that is worth taking note. I think you would at least agree with that. Okay. All right. So here's the geography. Not the best looking map, but here would be where Jesus is from, Nazareth. Here would be Jerusalem, and here's Bethlehem. Okay. And then down here is Egypt. Here's the Jordan River. Okay. Mediterranean Sea. And I'm going to stop here and I'll move on to the next lecture.